So after seeing Mo's presentation, I am truly humbled because I should retitle my presentation Inspired by Mo. You'll see a lot of common threads, but I don't claim to be a branding expert or a marketing expert like Mo or Robin. I am a company operator, and I think you'll see some of the same messages as you saw in Mo's presentation. So my presentation is about simplifying communications and how you, as a company and as leaders, can simplify communications. So let's look at what communications are to start. Communications at its most simple form are two people trying to get ideas between one another. There are verbal communications, and there are also unspoken communications that happen between people. When people try to communicate verbally, when they have an intent, they tell a story, they try to convince one another of something, they share information, they may argue, they may debate, but these are very verbal, very direct communications. Unspoken communications happen as well. You can sense a person's mood, you can sense their values, their experience, their beliefs, and sometimes their personal mission through unspoken communications that you get from an individual. Sometimes communications are healthy. You get clarity from those communications. It's respectful. You get a common understanding between two individuals. But communications can also be strained. Communications where people have difficulty understanding one another, get strained. People have hidden agendas. They incite conflict with communications. And sometimes you get very confusing messages. And that's just communications between individuals. Then take it up to that higher level of corporate communications. When you as a business, you as leaders in business, try to communicate your brand story, you create messaging frameworks, you try to communicate a message to your customers, to your partners, perhaps to your investors or analysts. Each one of these becomes a communication point that you're managing suddenly as a company. And what's interesting is that companies also share the same traits as individuals. They have very verbal ways of communicating. You can communicate your financial results. You communicate when you close a deal. You build a partnership. Sometimes you communicate to defend your position in a market. Other times you go on the offensive and you attack your competition. But companies also have an unspoken communications. You've worked, I'm sure, for companies where off-the-record comments happen. Although these are verbal, they are unspoken by the company. There might be actions that your company does. There might be gossip around your company. The community that knows of your company knows these unspoken communications that your company exudes. And often past employees are a significant part of this communication, this unspoken communication that your company is out there exuding into the market. So a company, just like a person, exudes values. And this comes right back to Mo's discussion. You attribute aspirations, beliefs, a mission, values, a mood, and experiences to a company. And the longer your company's been in business, the more and more this develops as essentially a view of how the world sees your business. So that all is a preamble. I'll leave you with one simple word tonight and 4 very difficult actions to take in order to simplify your communications. To simplify your communications, the one word I'll leave with you is authenticity. And authenticity might seem like a very easy thing. Sure, let's go be authentic. But I'll tell you, in my 20 years in running startups, in running tech companies, and being a global VP of a British-based company, this is one of the hardest things that a company can do, is be authentic. And let me tell you the four pillars that I think any company, you as leaders in your startups, in your companies, can do to really drive authenticity. These are them. I'll go through each one of these in detail, but essentially the first one is discover your values. And as per Mo's discussion, it really hit home with me. I've been in so many boardrooms where the executive team will get together and say, okay, let's establish the company's values. And I truly feel that that is a backwards exercise. How can you get together and establish your values? Oh, let's be this. Let's go be that. I truly believe, as Mo said, that the senior leadership in a company should get together and discover their own personal values towards the business. It doesn't have to be their personal values at home, but what values do they have towards the business? And I'll tell you, when this works, it works really well. I work currently for a company that's more than 15 years old. That company has had the same values for the last at least 5 to 6, 7 years, and they've endured, and they're the kind of values that the company is really based around. And it was about the senior leaders really discovering their own personal values towards the business rather than trying to make up some values to attract customers or to attract employees. The second piece, again, equally as hard, agree on a vision. So many executive teams, so many leadership teams have different ideas about where they want to take the company. How many startups have said, well, you know what, we're just in it to sell this thing. We're just in it, well, you know what, let's get some employees to help us out, but we're just in it to sell it. If that's your value, if that's your vision as a business and you're not aligned with the rest of your team, that your communications to the business, to your employees, to staff, to your customers are going to be fragmented in that same way. The third one, and this is a very difficult one, is assembling that aligned team. Move the right people in who can live those values that you and that vision that you as a leadership team have. And a very difficult part of this, move people out. Personally been with a company that has moved 7 of 9 executives out of the business and moved 2 in, and has really lived the assemble and align team, and the results are phenomenal. Now, there's another part of this that I like to touch on, and that is something that I call shadow values. There might be great values. You might want to have values of, you know, being the customer or being the team, being authentic, whatever those values are. But there are probably values in your company that people are following that may not be the right values for the company. And some of these might be really good values, like something like precision. Maybe your QA team is really, really precise, but maybe that's driving your velocity down into the ground. Maybe you can't ever ship a product because your product manager is too precise about how they're QAing or accepting the product. There could be values like that. Root them out of the business if they don't align with your corporate values. But also, there could be very explicit shadow values, like something like a sexist culture, where you want that out of the business and take the active steps that you need to do to drive the people who exhibit the shadow values out of the business. This is very difficult, but it needs to get done in order to communicate and simplify your company's alignment. And then finally, I'll leave you with a really hard one, and this is keep each other accountable. As a leadership team and a leadership team in a company, give your other leaders the permission and the mandate to keep each other accountable. Create that culture of openness. Call out the misalignment. How many meetings have you been in where 5 leaders will get together, you'll all agree on something, 3 people will walk out of the room and the other 2 will go, yeah, okay, what those guys said, forget it. We're going to do this and go forward on something else. If that's ever happened to you, one of those 2 people should go, hang on, I'm not doing this. Let's get those guys back in the room. Let's discuss this. This is incredibly difficult to do, but it does create the kind of alignment you need in order to communicate and in order to run your company effectively. So the world's full of companies that are not authentic. The world's full of companies whose values you won't agree with and they have misaligned teams. And it's really up to you to decide what kind of company you want to create or what kind of company you want to be part of. I've personally seen a company that has been branded before, and I've worked for this business that has had disconnected management, a tired old brand is what we were referred to, a sweatshop, we churn it through people. And the authenticity that we brought to this company has allowed us to have incredible business focus. We've been able to be recognized as leaders in our industry, and we've been recognized for our product vision. So 4 key points: discover your values, agree on the vision, assemble your team, and keep each other accountable. Currently, I have the privilege of being one of the 4 executives running a 100-person team here in Vancouver called Elastic Path, and we are truly a success story for what authenticity can do for a company. Thanks for your time tonight, and because it is Giving Tuesday, I do have a small plug, mobro.com TechPeter. I'm about $75 away from my goal of $1,000 raised for Movember. And for those of you who don't usually see me with a mustache, apologies for this, but it's for a good cause. Thanks, everyone.
The power of communicating is wonderful. Excellent presentation. I'm curious, in the instance where it sounded like the company was ready to go down for its 3rd time, what changed? Because embracing this requires someone to drive it from the top, and it requires, in that organization, I'm going to have to guess, radically changing the culture. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, companies always talk about, yeah, we got to that point where there was that critical pivot. And those critical pivots usually come from some sort of stress. And that stress usually comes from either running out of money, having your market collapse on you where you're selling your product, and having some element of the product or the company that still has the will to live. And in one of the cases, I won't mention the company, but essentially the company had not only run out of money, had not finished a product that it had wanted to take to market, and essentially went for funding. When that funding came into the business, the people behind that funding essentially said, you know what, if you don't change this business, we're not going to fund this. And so there's usually a critical moment where somebody with the outside credibility and also perspective comes in and says, this is something that you need to change. What I've found, and a company that one of the companies I've referred to is, I've found both really enlightened leaders, and I've found leaders who can't change. I was the CEO of a company a long time ago in my career, but I've made a career out of helping CEOs grow their businesses. I've found CEOs that are inflexible. And can't drive that company through the change. And I've found others who are very self-aware, who get to a point and go, you know what, maybe I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Maybe what I've got here is some really good values to the company, but I will welcome an addition to my leadership team that will help me through this next pivot. And quite frankly, those are the people who end up winning. Yeah.
Excellent presentation, Peter. Thank you. Could you give some examples on how shadow values can be addressed? Because those can be very difficult to eradicate, especially if a company has gone from a startup and very small and they've changed to a larger culture. It's those small culture values that tend to stick around and may not be explicitly expressed. And how do you call them out?
I'll give you two examples of shadow values. Two separate companies I've worked for. One was shadow values where essentially if you didn't go drinking with the CEO at 3:30 on Fridays, you didn't learn anything, the real stuff about the company. You were out, and as much as we hated it, we all had to go drinking with the CEO. And that was the way the company ran. And another example is just a huge, like a company with a party culture that goes a bit over the line, crosses lines. To be quite honest, I'm looking at a couple of people in the room here who actually work with me where I am currently. They're not to say that they're the partiers. Actually, what I would do is really invest in, whether they've got the title or not, bring in somebody who is your VP of people. Bring in somebody who really thinks about how people interact within the company, the norms how people interact with one another, the types of expectations that people have. Have those people really sit down from an impartial view. You know, it might be tough for a CEO to sit down with his VP and say, you know what, probably best that you don't take everybody out drinking, and you know that's kind of killing some parts of the company's culture. But it's better to have somebody who's coming in impartial and just kind of says, you know what, here are the values we plan to live by. I'm hoping we can all align to these. It doesn't necessarily even need to be anybody super senior, but somebody who's got that role of driving your people strategy. And it often isn't the CEO, and it often isn't a VP of sales. It isn't somebody with a specific mandate for operating the business, but it's somebody who looks at the culture of the company. So see HR as much more than, you know, benefits and recruiting. See them as a team that can really help with your culture.
Thank you. Quick question regarding what tools were used for developing all of this cultural authenticity? Cascading choices or other tools were used, or?
You know, culture is in companies is just it comes from what you do. So as a company, if you have a certain cadence of types of meetings, if you have a certain cadence of types of ways you plan, the culture comes from that. The accountability comes from that. The values come in through that process. And so if you subtly introduce the fact that there's a cadence to our operating rhythm, and it really comes down to that. If you hold each other accountable, whether it's on a weekly or a quarterly or an annually basis, to certain things, you start setting those types of cultures. And so you implicitly infuse the company with values if you as a leadership team model the types of values that you want to see in the company. And of course, you share your vision through that process, et cetera. We've implemented currently we've implemented a steady quarterly planning cycle that also then includes cascading objectives to every individual in the company. So I know that my most junior QA actually has objectives for this quarter that align with a high-level corporate goal. And that really gives them something to work towards. And when they nail that goal, they know that they've contributed to the overall business. So it's about the operating rhythms you establish in the business. Yeah.
Or back there, yeah. Actually, you come this way as the speaker.
Hey, Peter. I'm actually a founder of a company where we have an office here in Vancouver. We do a lot of product development, business development here. And then in Toronto, we've got sales, marketing, that kind of stuff, ad operations. We've got people in Mexico. We've got people in Brazil. We've got people in Montreal. Do you have any advice on how to manage, particularly two major offices across the country, but also other people around the world?
There's definitely no silver bullet to that one, and it's a really generational thing, to be quite honest, if I was really honest with you. I'd say that if your workforce is a bit older, it's about FaceTime. It's about not the Apple product. It's about actually getting in front of them and having the leaders in every office every now and then, cross-pollinating events, things like that. I worked for a 2,000-person British company, and I had employees in 9 different cities around the world. They didn't necessarily all have the same culture, but we all had a common goal that we were working towards. And I really feel like some of the operational process we put in made it so that when we did get together once a year, the customer account manager from Australia actually could talk to the customer account manager from England, and they would understand they would know the same language, and they'd feel part of the same culture. So certainly that was maybe 10 years ago, and that was a little bit more if you're talking about a bit of an older generation. I definitely find online tools are incredible for creating a culture within an organization. I still think some FaceTime is important, but if you get Slack between your sites, if you create permanent Google Hangouts where you just get a big screen, and so you can basically have a virtual wall where you see your other office, people see each other high-fiving on their way in and out of work. It doesn't really work across time zones too well, but something like that, just create any sort of connection. But if you don't have that visual, auditory connection, then create the processes in the company so we all feel like we're pulling for the same goal. Yeah.
I incredibly don't. No. Yeah. I will hand it over to Cindy.
Peter, you said that personal values were really important in defining company culture. What would you say is your greatest personal value?
That's a great question. Well, personal value, as far as towards when I talk about personal values, there one of the things that I mean is, as a leadership team, if you're getting together to establish values for your business, I say discover your own values, your own business values. There are also your personal values. You could have adoration for your kids. You could have love for your neighbors. You could have all sorts of things like that. But when you get together as a team, as a business team, those are the types of values that I essentially said establish that your business values align. To be quite honest, for me, I feel that authenticity, that word that I used, is something that keeps coming back to me. I've worked for companies where I have not found the fit, where I don't find that authentic culture, and those are the companies that I don't stick around and just I can't find myself working there. And then if I find I can influence a company to that authenticity, then those are the places I tend to be most successful. Yeah.
Hi, it sounds a little bit to me like you'll be dealing with like top management or founders or owners of the company after they already know they have a problem. So, you know, I've been in places like where you've been in places where you didn't fit and you knew there's something bad going on, but no one will admit to it. So I wonder how difficult or how easy it is to convince somebody that they need to do something or they're going down.
It's a lifelong challenge of mine, actually, and I would say it's a hit and miss game. To be quite honest, when you're in the business of changing companies, you got to get used to failing. And what you have to do is you have to really celebrate the wins. I'd say my hit rate's probably 1 in 4 right now of companies that I really feel I can make a significant impact on and drive the culture of the business forward. But you have to be able to spring back from the other 3. It's not easy. And I would say that, well, what was the question? It was around how do you convince someone? You know what? There are times where you know you're not going to, and that's where you gotta know when to fold them. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you.